We all go through different chapters in our lives, some stranger than others. Welcome to Strange Chapters, where we bring you true stories of the strange, the macabre, the paranormal, and the supernatural. So sit back, relax, and let's get to this week's featured author and their stories. This week, we are featuring 3 stories from paranormal investigator, researcher, and author John Olson. These 3 stories come from his Stranger series of books. You can find all of his books on Amazon, Kindle, strangerbridgerland.com, and anywhere fine books are sold. Story number 1, from Book 5, Beyond Stranger U.S. It Was Not My Brother, by Chris. I live in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio. I grew up there, and my family is all in that area as well. I have 3 brothers who are all older than me. I am the baby of the family, and there are 3 years between the third brother and me. The story takes place around the time when I was just recently married and living just outside downtown Columbus. My 3 brothers all lived near Columbus, and my parents still lived in the house I grew up in. We've always been a close family, and to this day, we all have dinner at my parents' house on the first Sunday of the month to see everyone and catch up. My mom calls me every day. If she doesn't call me, I call her. At this time in my life, I worked at an office in town. Because I was the newest employee, I was often sent out on runs for coffee or lunch. On this particular day, my boss sent me to get some stomach medication from the local store. It was a small grocery store, only a few blocks from work, so I jumped in the car and headed that way. Just as I walked into the store, I got lightheaded and disoriented for a moment. I was in my mid-20s and in great shape, so it took me by surprise. I sat down on a chair near the front of the store for a few moments and got my bearings. As my head started to clear, I looked around and noticed the store seemed different than it had when I visited just a week earlier. The registers were on the right side of the store, but I remember them being on the left. I shook off my feelings of discomfort and started to focus again on the task at hand. I got up slowly and walked back to the medicine aisle. I was briefly frustrated again. It was taking me a minute to find what I needed because the aisle was not in the same spot as the last time I visited. As I scanned over the medicine bottles, I noticed someone approaching me on my right. I glanced over towards the person standing next to me, then back to the meds. Suddenly, the realization hit me, and I turned around to see the man that was shopping next to me was my brother Sam. "Hi, Sam. What's up?" I said. Sam looked at me puzzled and said, "Hi." His tone was really dismissive. He immediately went back to looking at the shelves. I went on, "I thought you were out of town. When did you and Steph get back?" Sam looked at me with the same puzzled look. "I'm sorry, buddy. I don't know a Steph." Once he finished his sentence, he hurried down the aisle towards the front of the store. I figured maybe he was playing a prank on me. I followed him to the checkout. "What are you talking about, man?" I said as I punched him kiddingly in the arm. He whipped around and stared at me with an irritated, almost evil look. Then he poked me firmly in the chest with his finger. In a low growl, he said, "I don't know you. Now get the hell out of my face." I stood there, shocked to my core. He promptly paid for his items and gave me one more look of anger as he left the store. I went back to the aisle, picked up the medicine I'd been looking for, and returned up front to pay for it. The cashier was a haggard-looking lady, probably in her 50s. She gave me the total, and I handed her cash from my wallet. I thanked her and looked up at her as I grabbed my bag to leave. Without another word, she just snarled at me like a dog. I was completely perplexed. As I walked out the door and headed towards my car, the same powerful wave of nausea came over me, and I nearly passed out. Just as I got to my car, I couldn't fight the turning in my stomach anymore, and I got sick. I grabbed a napkin from my glove box and wiped my face as I started my car. As the air began to blow on me, I realized that I had completely sweat through my clothes. I pointed the cool air at my face and sat there with the air conditioner blowing on my face for about 5 minutes. Finally, the disorienting feeling left me. I drove back to work and walked in to meet my boss. He looked at me first with anger, then the look softened to concern. "Are you okay?" he inquired. "No, I got sick on my drive back," I told him. "Is that why it took you 2 hours?" he asked. Even more confused, I quickly looked down at my watch, and it was 1:55 p.m. I left the office at noon for an errand that should have taken me 30 minutes tops. I told my boss I was very sick and I needed to go home. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, trying to make sense of it all. When I got home, the first thing I did was call my brother Sam's house. There was no answer. I called my dad and asked if he had seen Sam. He reminded me that he was going to pick him and Steph from the airport tomorrow night. Puzzled, I asked him if he was sure. He confirmed again, then asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine, but as soon as I got off the phone and headed to bed, I fell asleep almost immediately and woke up at 9 p.m. that evening. I felt a little better, but was still confused. The next day, Sam and Steph came home from their trip. I verified with Sam that he had not been in town the day I thought I saw him. Looking back, trying to piece details together, I have no idea what happened. I know my brother, and I know whoever or whatever I saw in the store looked and sounded just like him. However, I cannot explain the changes in the store, my sudden sickness, my disorientation, and the loss of time. When I think about it, I'm still freaked out even today. Story 2, from Book 4, Stranger U.S., The Hatchet Head, by Josh. Growing up, I was always close to my grandpa. I only lived a little way from him when I grew up. I lived in a small town in northern Utah in the 80s. After I graduated high school, I moved to Salt Lake to work in the construction business. I visited my family, including my grandpa, as much as I could. My grandma passed away when I was only 10, and grandpa depended heavily on the family to keep up with things. The day I'd always dreaded came on a Saturday. My dad called to tell me my grandpa had passed away. I was devastated. I went up and spent a week with my family to help take care of grandpa's funeral arrangements and to help clean out his belongings. I was helping clean up his room when I came across a box of old memorabilia. It was his stuff from World War II and other various trinkets he had collected over the years. We all got to keep a few things to remind us of Grandpa, and I took this box. When I got home a few days later, I looked again through the box. At the bottom, I found what I thought was a big rock. As I turned it in my hand, I realized it was a Native American hatchet head. As I held it to the light to look a little closer, I could even see the lines where the leather straps used to be. I thought it was cool, so I put it on my bookshelf. I didn't think much about it until 2 weeks later, when weird things started to happen. Things started innocently at first, but soon got very scary. I would get up in the morning, and the hatchet head would not be on the bookshelf where I left it. Sometimes it was just on the floor, like it had fallen off the shelf. Other times it was on the kitchen table. A few times it was on the floor, right in front of my bedroom door. The activity went on for a week or two, and I began to think my mom was playing tricks on me, or that someone was playing a prank. I lived alone in a small apartment, and some of my friends had keys. When I asked each of them, they all denied it. Then one night, I was woken up from a dead sleep when I heard at my bedroom door. I jumped up and yelled out, "Who's there?" But it was deathly silent. I opened the door and flipped on my bedroom light. There on the floor was the hatchet head. I looked, and there was a significant mark on the door. I realized that it was the hatchet hitting the floor that caused loud sound that woke me up. I put the hatchet in a box in the hall closet and tried to go back to sleep. It took me a while to fall asleep again, but shortly after I dozed off, I was awakened by the sound of distant music coming from the closet. It was a rhythmic chanting and a deep bang of a drum. It was so deep I felt it in my gut and chest, and even more than hearing it with my own ears. I got out of bed, but as soon as I opened the door to my room, it stopped. It was still very early in the morning, but I decided to get up, get dressed, and head out. When I arrived home later in the day, I went to the closet and found everything in order. The hatchet was still in the box. A few weeks went by, and I had forgotten all about my creepy experiences. Then one night, I found myself woken again to a loud bang, and along with a distant chant and drums. I walked to the door and expected it to stop all at once. This time I opened the door, but sounds didn't stop. As I opened the door, the music was louder, even more pronounced. I turned on the light in my room and walked into the hall. The linen closet was just down the hall and to the right. I could see from my bedroom door that the closet door was open. I stood there staring down the hall. I was just about to turn on the hall light for a better look when a figure stepped out from behind the door. I could see he was in buckskin pants and no shirt. He had long tasseled hair and a band on his arm. I was staring at a Native American. My breath caught in my throat, and I reached behind me, fumbling for the switch to flip on the hallway light. I looked back up as the light illuminated the hall, and he was gone, and all the sounds had stopped. I grabbed a bat from my room and walked down the hall. Behind the door, the box was open on the floor, and the hatchet lay next to the box. I searched the apartment, but I knew I wasn't going to find anyone there. I was too afraid to sleep for the rest of the night, so I went out really early for a cup of coffee. After work, I came home and found the hatchet on the floor where I'd left it that morning. I picked it up and wrapped it up in a towel and drove to my small storage shed where I kept some of my things. I didn't want to give it to anyone, nor did I want to throw it away. I'm still afraid to bring it back to my house. Author's notes. After the interview, I told Josh that if he agreed, I would take care of the object. I've had the hatchet for about 15 years. At this time, I have not seen the figure attached to it. However, the hatchet does seem to have the ability to disappear at times. It will go missing or move. I've kept it safe in my collection of haunted objects. Story 3 from Stranger Paranormal Book 6, Fall Lake Sasquatch by Tyler. The summer before my senior year in high school, some friends and I wanted to go for a weekend of fishing and fun. One of my friends, Blair, had a family cabin not far from Fall Lake in northeastern Minnesota. It was about a 3-hour drive from our small town through some beautiful Minnesota wilderness. We finally convinced Blair's dad we would be responsible and not do anything crazy. We picked a weekend near the end of July and headed out on a Thursday afternoon. The 4 of us packed our gear into my old Toyota Camry and headed out to the cabin. There was me and my friends Blair, Marshall, and Adam. We got to the cabin at about 9 that night and settled in. Blair took the only bedroom, and the rest of us took the couches and floor. Late that night, I was woken up by a tapping on the cabin. It sounded like something was going around the cabin and feeling around the outside, testing the walls or looking for something. I sat quietly listening, and it went quiet after about 30 minutes. It wasn't long before I fell back asleep. We got up, ate cereal in the morning, and set to talk about our plans for the day. I mentioned I'd heard something significant making its way around the cabin during the night. Blair explained they have raccoons and the occasional bear that come around. I decided that's probably what I'd heard. It was Friday night and we were having a blast. We spent the day fishing and swimming. Then we made a fire outside of the cabin at dusk. We finally settled into bed around midnight. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of garbage cans outside of the cabin being moved around. I tried to wake Marshall, who was sleeping closest to me on the couch, but he wouldn't stir. I got up and walked to the back door. I could hear something searching through the garbage and the sound of the can rocking back and forth. I remembered that Blair had mentioned there was raccoons around and maybe even a bear. I grabbed the flashlight off the counter and decided to slowly open the door. I wanted to yell and scare the crap out of the raccoons. I remember chuckling as I slowly opened the door and turned the flashlight toward the cans. I swung the door open and turned on the flashlight and yelled, "What are you doing?" As the light hit the can, I let out a scream. Standing next to the can with a half-open garbage bag in its hand was an enormous creature. It was easily 8 foot tall and covered in brown blonde hair. Its face seemed almost human. It raised a colossal hand to cover its eyes, and its mouth fell open to show huge teeth. As I screamed, it let out a deep, penetrating grunt of surprise. I only saw this creature for a moment, but the vision is burned in my memory. I dropped the flashlight, pulled myself back into the cabin, and slammed the door, still screaming. I fell backward, my butt hitting the floor, and scrambled back, trying to get as far from the monster as possible. Suddenly, all the lights were on, and everyone was yelling at me, asking what was wrong. All I could get out was a stammering, it was a monster. Marshall helped me onto the couch, and Blair headed for the door. "Don't open it!" I yelled at him. He gave me a weird look and opened the door. He picked up the flashlight and looked around. When he came back in, we all sat down, and I explained what had happened to me. They seemed a bit skeptical, but could tell I was seriously shaken. Blair said there was nothing out there, but one of the cans was knocked over, and garbage had been spread everywhere. I told them what I saw again, and they asked if it could have been a bear. I said there's no way it was a bear. Then someone asked if it was Bigfoot. Thought about it for a moment, and finally I replied, "Yes, I bet it was." Everyone went back to bed, but I sat up with the flashlight all night. The following day, we scoured the area, but couldn't find any sign. The ground was too hard for footprints. None of them questioned me about what I saw, but I still felt like they didn't believe me. Later, Marshall told me his dad had seen Bigfoot on a hunting trip when he was in his 20s. He said he had sworn up and down it had walked past his tree stand on the opening morning of the deer hunt. This made me feel a little better. I spent the rest of the weekend not far from anyone. There was no way I was going to be anywhere alone. It's been many years since that trip, but I can still see the image of Bigfoot when I close my eyes. I've heard many other Sasquatch stories in Minnesota, so I believe Bigfoot is around. Thank you for listening. Hopefully you enjoyed these 3 stories from the Stranger Bridgerland series of books from paranormal researcher, investigator, and author John Olson. You can find John's books on Amazon, Kindle, strangerbridgerland.com, and wherever fine books are sold. Please go rate, review, and subscribe to the show to help more people discover us. And once again, we thank you for listening. Have a good day. Y'all stay safe out there.